ringrazio tanto Stefania per affidarmi l'incarico di sostituirla. Sono la nuova Stefania che introduce i due cari amici e colleghi. È un piacere per me davvero essere qui con voi perché ho una particolare ammirazione per entrambi. Prima cominciamo per le signore, la professoressa Luisa Brunori, che è direttrice de recherche au Centre national de la recherche scientifique, attachée à l'École normale supérieure e prof. Abbiamo una bellissima novità perché da settembre Luisa è prof.
Ah, ok.
Quindi a posto.
Lei non mi cambia niente, non cambio neanche l'ufficio.
Ma comunque
non
una
cambio lo
bella
stipendio, non cambio niente.
Lei è una grandissima specialista del diritto commerciale. Dal 2020, come sappiamo quasi tutti, è stata la direttrice di questo progetto che ci ha permesso a tanti di noi di conoscerci, di interagire, di creare questo legame speciale oltre al livello professionale e anche personale, che è stato FEDRA. E al momento insegni un sacco di corsi a Parigi, fra i quali Histoire de la dogmatique juridique, Droit économique, Histoire transnationale du droit, e in particolare si interessa sulle compagnie e le società di commercio nell'ambito hispano-americano in età moderna. Quindi lascio la parola a te, Luisa, grazie.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Le agradezco mucho por esta presentación muy simpática. Questo era giusto per fare un po' di folklore plurilinguistico. Interverrò in inglese per non dover scegliere fra l'italiano e il francese, che sarebbero le mie due lingue professionali, quindi parlo in inglese e così non devo scegliere. Vi chiedo scusa, avendo trasformato il mio PowerPoint in un PDF, non ho visione delle slide che si sostengono, quindi può darsi che abbia delle difficoltà di manipolazione. Vi chiedo scusa in anticipo. Cerco di mettere anche qui. Allora, for the first thing, thank you, Stefania. It's a great honor to be here. I feel truly to be a privilege to stay here today. Today I would like to take you in a journey in 16th century Seville, a city that was the beating heart of the world's first truly global economy. Picture the docks of Seville in the 16th century. Ships laden with silver from the mines of Potosí and Zacatecas, silk from China via the Manila galleon, arriving to the harbor, but at the same time, wine and olive oil from Andalusia, from all Spain, and goods from all Europe, all waiting to be loaded into the fleets to carry them across the Atlantic to the new world. Seville is the city when merchants, notaries, and learned jurists were not just witnesses of the history, but also architects of a new economic and legal order. This morning, Jake and Maria told we are the economic system, and they are the economic system. My talk today is about a new hypothesis on which I'm been reflecting recently, that it's to say how, in this new world, commercial partnership became one of the essential elements of what we may call a transatlantic lex Mercatoria. The expression is mine, I invented it, meaning a shared set of rules, customs and practices that allowed trade to flourish across oceans. To achieve it, I will cross-reference diverse types of sources, mainly doctrinal works, and the research that I conducted in the notarial archives of Seville. I therefore aim to test my hypothesis regarding the existence or not of a transatlantic lex Mercatoria that, in my opinion, began to take shape in the 16th century and that have a longer future. But to test this hypothesis, I will draw on two complementary sources that are complementary but also interconnected, as we will see, I hope. I mean commercial partnership contracts and the doctrinal text of the period. Okay. Okay. Today, for the sake of brevity, I will refer solely to Tomás Mercado Suma de Fatos y Contratos, which is, in my opinion, particularly representative, but of course there are many other treaties very interesting. And as well, I present some commercial partnership contracts drafted in Seville during the second half of the 16th century. Tomás de Mercado, Suma de Fatos y Contratos, and the notarial archives of Seville show how the new transatlantic global new economy emerged not from royal decrees or papal words, but from the everyday realities of merchants, trying to make sense of a world that was becoming increasingly connected. Let me begin by setting the stage. The 16th century was a time of unprecedented economic transformation. The discovery of conquest and of the Americas didn't just bring gold and silver to Spain, but it reviewed the economic system of Europe. Seville, the city of Seville, thanks its monopoly on trade with the New World, became the nerve center of this new global economy. As Tomás de Mercado, a Dominican friar and moral advisor to Seville merchants, wrote in his Suma de Fatos y Contratos, Seville is the center of all world trade. Here, the great and important exchange operations take place, which go to earth in and outside the kingdom. Sales and purchases are agreed on credit or for cash at incredible prices. But this wasn't just about wealth, it was about a challenge. The old ways of doing business, the medieval societas based on personal trust and small-scale partnerships, simply couldn't handle the scale, the risks, the distances of transatlantic trade. Merchants needed new tools, new contracts, new ways of thinking about risk, credit, and collaboration. And that's where commercial partnerships, compañías, come in. The 16th century partnership, unlike medieval commercial partnership, were complex, adaptive, and often daring arrangements that allowed merchants to pool resources, share risk, and operate across oceans. And to understand how they worked, let's dive into the notarial archives of Seville. Analyzing partnership contracts from the second half of the 16th century, in this case that I present today, if you read these contracts, they reveal a world where merchants are experimenting new forms of collaboration to meet demands of a globalized economy. For example, the duration of the partnership. In the medieval world, a societas was often a short-term personal arrangement tied to the lifetimes or specific ventures of the partners involved. But in Seville, merchants started forming partnership that lasted as long as a trip to America and back, sometimes years. For instance, so the duration of the partnership changed radically. For instance, a contract from 1584 that you can see established that this company shall last the time of the voyage that to and from Tierra Firme. So it's the trip, the transatlantic trip that decided the duration of the partnership. This was a radical departure from the old model. It reflected the realities of transatlantic trade when merchants needed long-term stability to plan their investments. The situation changes profoundly, even with regard to the treatment of labor and financial capital contributed in the partnership. In the emerging transatlantic trade, the distinction between the labor element and the financial element becomes far more pronounced. And this, in turn, reflects a similarly clear distinction among partners. Now you had the social stance, the sedentary investor who put up only capital, and the social trackstans, the traveling merchants, who took the physical risk of the trip. In this page of a contract, I'm sorry, I didn't translate it, but you can see clearly that one partner puts capital and the other puts industry, labor. But the shares of the gains, the shares of the gain weren't always equal. Tomás de Mercado observed and critiques this trend. Tomás de Mercado asked, is there anything more barbaric than sending a merchant in a long, dangerous voyage and rewarding him with only a quarter of the profits? So what Tomás de Mercado is observing? Is observing that labor and money had value, of course, but that the monetary capital contributed to the partnership progressively assumes greater value than the labor provided it. Tomás de Mercado was the spiritual guide of the powerful consulate of the merchant of Seville, expressed, as you can see, strong reservation about this progressive devaluation of the labor element in contrast to the increasing valorization of the financial element within the commercial partnership. And he argued that the social strengths, the partner who do the trip, the merchant who traveled to the Indies should be compensated for his effort, for his expertise, for the hardships he endured. But the commercial reality that Tomás de Mercado is observing is quite the opposite. The financial element increasingly asserted itself as the dominant productive force within the configuration of the partnership. And the most striking evidence of this shift lies in the disproportionate share of the profits, because the capital contributing partner, the financial partnership, had a major part of the sharing of the gains than the merchant that traveled to the Indies. And it is absolutely visible in the configuration of the contracts of the the second half of the 16th century. The share of the gates is progressively more favorable to the financial. But what is even more interesting for the topic of today's topic, Lex Mercatoria, is that contractual innovation is also accompanied by contractual standardization. For this reason, I asked Guido this morning my question. In my view, the phenomenon of standardization is deeply intertwined with the Lex Mercatoria phenomenon, understood as the convergence of normative frameworks arising from shared commercial practices and common legal culture. I think that the commercial practice alone is not sufficient to create Lex Mercatoria. A common legal culture is needed. Helped in this case of Seville by the role played by public powers, in this case by the Casa de la Contratación. At my left there is the most important specialist about Casa de la Contratación, so I envoy of Anna's Belem important work on this topic. And so, despite the diversity of the merchants involved, the Spaniards of course, but also Flemish, Italian, French, the commercial partnership contracts drafted in Seville in this period show a remarkable uniformity. Almost all the contracts followed a similar structure. First important is there are a common name, a nomen juris, compagnia, and they follow all, without any exception, a similar structure. So the first element is always the identification of the parties, including the residence and the occupation, but that's classic choice. And then, more interesting, second element is always the second element after the identification of the parties, the indication of the capital contribution, which were meticulously recorded, often down the last maravilla. From the perspective of emphasizing the financial element, as I told, it is worth noting that a monetary contribution to the partnership is linguistically, the terms frame this capital element as a constitutive element of the partnership contract. Despite the fact that, from a strictly legal point of view, the capital contributed is not an essential element of the contract. But reading this contract can make us to think that it is an essential element. Then all the contract continues with the purpose of the partnership, whether it was trading of silk, or olive oil. In this case, it's a very nice contract about export from Andalusia to America of wine. This is a long contract about export wine in America. Here you can see is the explication of how the social structures, the partner who goes to America had to do to sell this wine and what to do with the money that he gained in America, because of course all these partnerships are import-export. They go to America full of olive oil and wine, but they come back loaded with other goods. So it's very, very detailed. I think if you want, I can show you later. Then always the penalties for the not good honoring of the contract are foreseen, and the question of penalties brings me to a most important aspect. Is what I would call, again, is my expression, a pan-oceanic jurisdiction. What I'm meaning about that? Yet it goes without saying that the formal stipulation of penalty of a liability regime need to be effective, because it would not useful to establish a regime not effective. But the problem is that this contract for his nature had to be executed in the other side of the ocean. And so these contracts concluded for transatlantic trade are, for their nature, intended to produce effects both in Spain, where they were written, but also, and maybe above all, in America. And so, to this end, in all these contracts with for partnership with transatlantic trade, the parties approve a clause of a jurisdiction acceptance that might be termed a pan-Atlantic jurisdictional clause. Is the last lines. We grant jurisdictional authority to any court, whether in Seville or in any other part of the Indies. I don't know if you can read that, but trust me or trust Anna that can translate. Another highly significant aspect is that all these contracts are drafted by professional notaries. We discussed this topic this morning, and I hope to show you that the evidence of this aspect. These notaries are there to precise formal norms for document writing. In 1503, the Pragmatica d'Alcalá, a royal decree issued by the Catholic monarch, had reformed notarial practice in Spain. And this Pragmatica required that every contract be recorded in full, not summarized, and that these records be kept in protocolos books, libros de protocolos, which notaries were obliged to maintain with a huge care. And this created a reliable, searchable archive on commercial activity, one that was crucial for enforcing contracts across long distances. This fosters great confidence in the contractual instrument among merchants, as well as reliance on notaries to translate the merchants' practical needs into legal terms. It was the work of notaries, who weren't just passive scribes, but they are active shapers of legal norms. In Seville, notaries reuse formulas, advise the merchants on better clauses, and ensure that these contracts were clear, enforceable, and adaptable to the needs of the new long-distance trade. So merchant practice, together with the notarial professions, create new shared models of common legal instruments tailored to the new commercial context. But, and I insist on this point, let's not forget the theorists, the people who try to make sense of all these changes. And there, Tomás de Mercado, the spiritual assistant of the power consulate of Seville, as I say, is very important for our talk. His Summa de Tratos y Contratos was the first work to systematically address the moral and legal dilemma of this new global economy. Mercado was a moral theologian, a journalist educated in Salamanca, but it was also a keen observer of economic reality. He didn't just write about abstract principles. He was not a philosopher. He wrote about the practice of everyday faith, and he was taking on specific country, and he was forging to a shared normative framework among merchants venturing into trade with the Indies. You can see here he dedicated a long chapter of his Summa de Tratos y Contratos on commercial partnership and the conditions they need to comply with in order to be fair. So you can notice that Tomás de Mercado is not only describing a phenomenon, is giving norms to merchants, so it's contributing to create normative. Another little thing I would like to add is that you can notice that this treaty is not in Latin, is in Spanish. What does it mean? That is not a treaty for scholars or theologians. It was a guide for merchants, a sign of just how practical and merchant-driven this new legal order was. Mercado wasn't just theorizing about commerce, he was shaping it. So, to conclude, did a transatlantic legal lex Mercatoria emerge in 16th century? I'd argue yes, but with some caveats. First, this wasn't a formal normative frame like the laws of a kingdom or a city. Instead, it was something more organic, a set of shared practices, customs, and norms that arose from everyday realities of doing business in a globalizing world. But I not agree when we say Lex Mercatoria was an unwritten law, an unwritten corpus of norms. This Lex Mercatoria was written, but it was written in the contract or in the treaties. Second element, it was uniform yet adaptive. The contracts, partnership contracts I studied show a remarkable consistency in their structure and language. But they also show adaptability, the ability to tailor agreements to the specific needs of different ventures. Third element, it was a collaborative phenomenon, and I insist on this point. This Lex Mercatoria wasn't the work of a single group. It was, of course, shaped by merchants who brought their practical knowledge and needs to the table, but it was also the work of notaries who standardized and recorded these agreements. It was also the work of learned jurists and scholars, like Tomás de Mercado, who provided the legal frameworks and the moral frameworks of this agreement. And also it was the work by public institutions like the Casa de la Contratación, which oversaw and regulated trade, and again I invite Anna Belem works on this topic. So in many ways, this 16th century Lex Mercatoria was a precursor to modern corporate law. The shift from intuitus personae to intuitus pecuniae in these partnerships anticipated the joint stock companies of the 17th century. And the standardization of contracts, the idea that business could be conducted according, shared, and above all, predictable rules was a crucial step towards the global economy we know today. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from this period is that globalization doesn't erase local particularities. It absorbs and standardizes them. The 16th century Lex Mercatoria, Transatlantic Lex Mercatoria, my hypothesis, was a bottom-up construction when practice led theory and the necessity led to innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Grazie Luisa, scusate, per questa bellissima relazione. Sai che io sono devi sapere che sono la tua fan numero 1. E ora, se va bene per voi, passiamo al nostro secondo, non so come si dice in italiano, relatore. È un piacere per me presentarvi, sicuramente già vi conoscete, Victor Breton-Blon, che anche con lui ho il piacere di comunicare che è diventato da settembre anche lui professore des universités. Quindi c'è tanto da celebrare. Lui diventerà il maître de conférence en histoire du droit a Paris 13 a partire da settembre.
Sì, per lui sì.
Per lei sì?
No, ma perché io ero già full professor anche prima, lui no.
Sì, chiedo scusa, magari avrei dovuto spiegarmi un po', ma io non capisco la...
Nessuno capisce il sistema francese, non ti preoccupare.
Ma questo panel è molto bello perché in realtà Victor è stato un allievo di Luisa. Lui ha fatto la tesi di dottorato che abbiamo avuto la fortuna, on était très content d'avoir pour la parution de ta thèse de doctorat l'année dernière sur l'université de Toulouse Capitole. Oui, c'est ça. Et toute histoire des droits. Oui, j'ai publié avec ma thèse, c'était publié aussi là. Ma vabbè. Sempre sulla lettera del cambio, della quale parleremo oggi, io ti lascio la parola, un piacere, prego.
Grazie mille, merci beaucoup Anna. Thank you very much Stefania, of course, for inviting me. You know that MICOLL has been a source of inspiration for me for the past year, so it's really an honor to be among you today. And regarding my contribution, due to a fairly short preparation time, choosing a topic was quite difficult. And of course, I am going to speak about the Bill of Exchange, my topic. But to challenge the myth of Lex Mercatoria, I want to take a fresh look at the core principles of the law of bills and notes, based on archival sources from the 16th century. And I will not deviate from the general narrative of today, speaking of unity within diversity, adaptability. I will speak about that, but outside notarial acts or treaties. And as requested, my presentation will be in French, but with an extended presentation in English in the PowerPoint. So, le premier point que je dois éclaircir concerne évidemment le lien entre le droit cambiaire et la Lex Mercatoria. Le droit cambiaire, the law of bills and notes, est généralement associé à la qualification de l'effet de commerce, mais surtout à la notion de titre négociable. Ainsi, c'est un droit qui est lié au développement de la lettre de change, mais pas n'importe quel développement, une lettre de change qui se comporterait comme une forme de monnaie fiduciaire, avec un caractère européen, mais surtout transnational particulièrement fort. Ainsi, dès son apparition au XIVe siècle, la lettre de change repose sur un système de prestations réciproques pour garantir une opération qui traverse naturellement, peut-on dire, les territoires et les communautés. Le titre est spécialement conçu comme le support physique d'une créance, mais il incarne aussi le droit sur cette créance en étant un ordre de paiement et une reconnaissance de dette qui a un formalisme très reconnaissable à une échelle européenne, un formalisme très stable. Et c'est de cette façon que le droit cambiaire va se construire en s'affranchissant des frontières pour faire le transfert immatériel de l'argent avec une conversion monétaire, et cela grâce à des usages transnationaux qui sont créés dans de grands réseaux de marchands et de banquiers, évidemment sans parler du soutien des juristes et des théologiens qui, sur le droit romain et le droit canonique au caractère européen, vont assurer la légitimité de la lettre de change. Alors cette présentation, évidemment, elle rappelle le mythe de la lex Mercatoria, c'est-à-dire un corps de règles universelles, une sorte de droit commun pour les marchands. Selon l'historiographie qui a longtemps dominé, la lettre de change serait le support d'un droit profondément européen, transnational, un droit qui assure la cohésion de ses utilisateurs, quelles que soient leurs origines, et pour reprendre l'expression consacrée, la lettre de change formerait une sorte de république en Europe. On parle de république de la lettre de change. Au XVIe siècle, une étape cruciale en la matière. La lettre de change devient un outil indispensable pour les échanges transatlantiques. Mais la trajectoire du droit cambiaire, du droit qui lui est attaché, est particulièrement incertaine. Parce que les marchands et les banquiers cherchent à transférer en pleine propriété leurs titres de commerce, dont les lettres de change, pour justement produire une forme de papier-monnaie. Et cette dynamique ouvre la voie à ce que l'on appelle le principe de la négociabilité, c'est-à-dire une cession de créance simplifiée, une cession de créance par simple tradition, mais surtout une cession à laquelle on attache des garanties au paiement particulièrement solides. La concrétisation de cette évolution, liée au principe de négociabilité, elle semble précaire. Parce qu'on sait que la négociabilité peine à se réaliser pleinement. Elle se diffuse de manière très variable selon les territoires et les communautés de marchands. Malgré ça, la lettre de change renforce son caractère européen. Elle renforce son caractère transnational. Donc il y a une sorte d'ambiguïté face au besoin de stabilité, de réciprocité qui est à l'origine de ce système. Alors sur cette problématique, trois perspectives sont à envisager, trois perspectives, et on en a évoqué une ce matin. Plusieurs travaux proposent d'abord de saisir la question de l'innovation financière à travers des phases de progrès, mais aussi de stagnation, de recul et d'acculturation. L'innovation financière ne se ferait pas en ligne droite. D'autres travaux constatent la difficulté de comprendre l'évolution européenne du droit des affaires sans la lex Mercatoria. Même une lex Mercatoria qui serait tardo-médiévale pour le XVIe siècle et le XVIIe siècle. Dans ce cadre, ces travaux estiment que l'on pourrait s'éloigner de l'idée d'un droit universel au profit d'un modèle plus souple de style marchand. Enfin, d'autres travaux suggèrent, pour le droit cambiaire, de sortir d'une acception rigide de la négociabilité pour éviter une vision trop uniforme et parfois anachronique du droit face aux réalités du terrain. Donc, une relecture du droit cambiaire est possible. Il ne s'agit pas de remettre en cause les grands principes de la matière, évidemment, mais de nuancer certaines idées, certaines présupposées. Notamment de nuancer l'idée selon laquelle le droit cambiaire s'accomplit par la négociabilité, un transfert simplifié avec des garanties solides. Il faudrait en réalité considérer en amont un processus plus large d'adaptation de la lettre de change elle-même chez les marchands. Alors dans ce cadre, je pense que pour commencer ce travail, il est intéressant de débuter là où tout commence, c'est-à-dire la pratique commerciale. Et je vais donc utiliser comme exemple le cas de Simón Ruiz, le banquier castillan du XVIe siècle, avec un échantillon de 250 lettres de change. Et on verra avec ce cas une application très concrète de beaucoup de choses qui ont été dites depuis ce matin. Alors, tout d'abord, on va le présenter un petit peu pour montrer comment, dans un réseau précis, la lettre de change va passer d'un outil de manipulation de la monnaie à un outil de mobilisation des créances plus large. Simón Ruiz est un banquier castillan de premier plan, il est assez connu. C'est un banquier qui est spécialisé dans le transfert de fonds sur de longues distances, avec justement une conversion monétaire. Il assure une vaste circulation de l'argent entre des marchés espagnols, italiens, flamands ou français, grâce à la lettre de change, et il profite spécialement du mécanisme des bancos de ferias, c'est-à-dire un procédé de compensation par des mouvements de capitaux entre les temps de foire, des mouvements réciproques, un procédé de clearing. Alors dans son ensemble, la situation de Simón Ruiz reflète une configuration classique par laquelle un opérateur, grâce à ses réseaux, fait voyager à distance de l'argent pour ses clients et réalise un bénéfice par la manipulation des devis. C'est plus largement un véritable écosystème de marchands banquiers qui maîtrise une sorte de langage commun que l'on appelle le langage des traites et des remises, donner des lettres de change et les recevoir. Alors naturellement, dans ce système, Simón Ruiz est souvent celui qui reçoit ou envoie les fonds avec des partenaires de confiance. Il articule ses transactions presque exclusivement autour des temps de foire avec des interconnexions très importantes des réseaux très denses entre Medina del Campo, Lyon, Besançon, Valladolid ou encore Villalonga. C'est un rythme forain qui renforce vraiment l'aspect monétaire de la lettre de change, avec un cadre très spéculatif, puisqu'on a des temps spécifiques pour calculer les taux de change, pour envoyer les intermédiaires et pour centraliser l'offre et la demande. Dans cette configuration, la lettre de change est ce que l'on appelle un instrumentum ex posa cambi. C'est surtout le transfert des monnaies qui l'intéresse, avec un système d'avance de fonds et de remboursement. Mais cette conception n'exclut pas une logique parallèle, ou plutôt additionnelle, en faveur d'une mobilisation plus large des créances. Cette mobilisation, au regard de l'activité de Ruiz, s'impose pour renforcer la fonction de paiement et de crédit de la lettre de change, en dehors de la seule question des devises, des monnaies. Alors c'est un phénomène qui a déjà été identifié dès le XVIe siècle et qui n'a pas encore été véritablement mis en lien avec la construction du droit cambiaire lui-même. Pourtant, pour moi, cette idée de mobilisation des créances représente un premier pas vers l'idée de titre négociable, une sorte de monnaie fiduciaire avant l'heure, parce que la question de la transférabilité des titres, pour moi, doit sortir du strict cadre monétaire. Alors comment ça peut se percevoir chez Simón Ruiz ? Eh bien, ce sont d'abord la flexibilité des rapports de créanciers à débiteurs. On a des fonctions sur la lettre de change qui sont de plus en plus interchangeables selon les ressources disponibles entre le banquier castillan et ses collaborateurs européens, avec des partenaires irréguliers de plus en plus importants, des partenaires qui ne font pas partie intégrante de son réseau. C'est une situation qui dépasse la logique initiale d'un banquier qui remet des fonds pour les rendre disponibles à distance. C'est une situation qui favorise une circulation continue et cyclique de l'argent, tout en évitant le décaissement du numéraire, tout en évitant de sortir les pièces de monnaie. Cette situation se concrétise aussi par une volonté précoce de sécuriser l'extinction des créances. Cette sécurisation passe par deux mécanismes que j'ai pu trouver de manière assez régulière. D'une part, l'acception de la traite par le tiré, le payeur, et d'autre part, de manière un peu plus originale, la fixation de la valeur des espèces de la lettre de change. Dans les deux cas, ce sont deux mécanismes qui servent à protéger l'opération des aléas qui sont liés au système des foires. À la fois pour le prix, qui peut évoluer d'une foire à l'autre, mais aussi pour la distance entre les individus qui sont en foire. Et pour moi, ce sont des éléments qui montrent une volonté de renforcer la confiance dans la traite, que la traite doit inspirer chez ceux qui ont besoin d'argent en dehors de la seule considération spéculative. D'une part, on peut voir sur les lettres de change, mais aussi les correspondances de Simon Ruiz, que l'acceptation, le mécanisme de l'acceptation devient central pour assurer l'engagement du tiré, de celui qui doit payer. Surtout lorsque cette personne n'est plus nécessairement un intermédiaire du banquier, mais un débiteur qui a été sollicité en dehors des grands réseaux bancaires. Ensuite, et de manière plus importante, la fixation de la valeur des espèces, que l'on retrouve sur beaucoup de lettres de change, elle diminue l'importance du jeu d'échange, pourtant au cœur de la légitimité de l'opération elle-même par rapport à l'usure. Et de ce fait, elle permet de renforcer la fiabilité du titre dans sa capacité à éteindre des créances, puisque la valeur ne bouge plus, donc on sait à l'avance quel type de créance on va pouvoir éteindre, quel type d'argent on va pouvoir recevoir. En revanche, c'est bien un principe qui cause une entorse majeure au principe du droit romain et du droit canonique, et donc je pense que ça explique le fait que cette clause n'apparaisse que dans des circuits assez réduits, peut-être pour éviter de la proposer là où elle pourrait encourager des contestations et des litiges. Alors, pour finir sur cette question, la manipulation monétaire existe toujours. Elle est toujours dominante, évidemment. Mais les liens entre les créanciers et leurs débiteurs et la fiabilité accordée au titre sont renforcés, sont intensifiés. On souhaite avant tout permuter des devises. Mais désormais, la possibilité de mobiliser une créance détenue sur autrui devient une alternative. Elle devient une part intégrale du système cambiaire. Ce constat coïncide d'ailleurs avec l'influence croissante d'Anvers à la fin du XVIe siècle, parce que la ville brabançonne se démarque par un recul de la question des monnaies au profit d'une circulation de titres bancaires, au profit des marchands. La lettre de change ne renie pas donc sa conception initiale, mais elle s'insinue dans cette dynamique flamande depuis les marchés du Sud, ce qui est assez peu connu pour les marchés espagnols ou encore italiens, même si les Italiens sont évidemment dans les fonds. Cette transition montre donc qu'il n'y a pas intégralement une rupture entre une tradition médiévale de la lettre de change sur les monnaies et une tradition plus moderne liée à l'utilisation de la traite comme une sorte de monnaie. Le cas de Simon Ruiz montre une forme de cohabitation avec une gestation de grandes transformations futures, puisque par exemple la question des monnaies va disparaître au XVIIe siècle pour accepter les monnaies émises dans une seule monnaie de compte. Donc là, on commence à avoir une apparition de ce principe. Et pour finir, ça va favoriser l'apparition de ce que je pourrais appeler une pré-négociabilité avant l'apparition de l'endossement. Parce que cette idée de mobilisation des créances s'accompagne du souci de transférer beaucoup plus facilement la lettre de change. Alors, au début de l'époque moderne, on le sait, c'est la diffusion de l'endossement qui permet de simplifier le transfert des titres de commerce en pleine propriété. Cette innovation, l'endossement, est vraiment associé en général à l'idée de droit cambiaire, de titres négociables. Mais elle ne répond pas à une diffusion homogène à l'échelle européenne. Par exemple, à Anvers, le billet à ordre supplante largement la lettre de change et l'endossement à la même époque, dans les Pays-Bas méridionaux en général. L'endossement est restreint ou interdit dans certaines cités italiennes, comme à Naples en 1607. Donc c'est une diffusion variée. Cette question, pour moi, mérite une attention, et on va voir que chez Simon Ruiz, elle est importante. Parce que chez le banquier castillan, le transfert des traites ne passe ni par l'endossement, ni par ses avatars, comme la clause à ordre ou au porteur. Au contraire, c'est la girata qui sert à réaliser une forme élémentaire de circulation de l'argent par un ordre de virement, une sorte de traitement interbancaire. Cette technique, elle peut assez étonner parce que la girata ne fait que constater un transfert par écriture comptable. Ce n'est pas un ordre de paiement. Elle ne donne aucun droit au porteur de la traite, aucune action contraignante sur le débiteur pour satisfaire un nouveau bénéficiaire. Elle ne remplit donc pas la condition essentielle pour admettre le principe de négociabilité. Elle est loin d'être aussi efficace que l'endossement ou que la clause à ordre. Mais, et c'est pour moi important ici d'insister, pour moi, la pratique doit être saisie dans sa globalité. Il ne faut pas regarder que cette technique, mais il faut regarder cette technique dans la lettre de change et dans les réseaux. Parce que le recours à des manipulations comptables et des liens de créanciers à débiteurs en réseau vont amplifier l'effet de cette technique pour l'amener à transférer plus efficacement les lettres de change. En effet, la création d'une lettre de change suppose initialement le versement d'une valeur en un lieu pour la mise à disposition de l'équivalent en un. De manière assez classique, Simon Ruiz, en tant que bailleur de fonds, est celui qui donne le plus d'argent. Mais en parallèle, il y a des chaînes de manipulation comptable qui permettent d'accentuer la circulation du capital par le bailleur. Ce constat se retrouve surtout dans la relation entre celui qui donne l'ordre de payer, le tireur, et celui qui va payer, le tireur. On peut observer ici une diversification des liens économiques et juridiques pour faciliter la circulation des créances, soit par l'intermédiaire d'un commis, soit par la préexistence d'une dette, ou par l'octroi d'une avance entre les parties. Cette configuration peut même s'étendre à une relation comptable extérieure auprès d'un tiers qui servira à justifier à la fois l'engagement de celui qui crée le titre et de celui qui doit le payer. Lors de l'échéance, la girata intervient pour permettre de finaliser ce transfert d'une tête à une autre sans décaissement de numéraire, dans le cadre de plusieurs relations économiques, mais avec un seul titre. Ce processus se retrouve par exemple pour une traite de Lyon sur Medina del Campo en 1587, payable au foire de février à Simon Ruiz pour une valeur en compte. Dans ce cadre, le tireur donne l'ordre à son tiré de payer, non pas pour son propre compte, mais pour celui de Pedro et Guillaume P. de Nantes, alors que la girata conduit au final à créditer Bernal del Juego à Medina del Campo. Résultat, la créance voyage, dans un sens large, à Medina del Campo en passant par Nantes, avec au moins 5 relations de créanciers à débiteurs différentes. Alors cette dynamique est largement facilitée par un cadre, on va dire, municipal favorable. À Medina del Campo, il existe un système de vérification des comptes de banque qui solidifie largement tout ça sous les autorités municipales. Mais ça modifie surtout la fonction traditionnelle du change des monnaies, en diversifiant la manière de remettre et de prendre de l'argent, et la capacité de la lettre de change à éteindre des dettes. Et c'est ça le plus important. Ou plutôt, le point sans doute qui pour moi est aussi remarquable, c'est le recours uniforme à la girata dans les affaires de Simon Ruiz. Un recours qui facilite les manipulations comptables, mais qui peut étonner, parce que Simon Ruiz intervient dans des marchés internationaux dans lesquels d'autres formes de transfert existent. L'endossement, la clause à ordre ou l'assignation à Anvers ou à Lyon. Mais la girata est parfaitement calibrée pour les affaires de Simon Ruiz, pour ses relations comptables. Il y aurait donc une capacité assez unique à créer de l'unité dans la diversité, à faire coexister plusieurs techniques pour atteindre un effet sensiblement similaire, le transfert des prix. Et c'est sans doute la question de la confiance, de la réputation des réseaux qui joue ici le plus pour assurer à Simon Ruiz et à ses partenaires la bonne utilisation de cet instrument face à eux. Quoi qu'il en soit, l'activité de Ruiz montre une transition. Mais malgré cette transition, on retrouve une ambition européenne, une ambition transnationale qui est liée au droit cambiaire, au principe de la négociabilité, même si les caractéristiques juridiques ne sont pas les mêmes que celles qui seront avec l'endossement au moins un siècle plus tard. Encore là, faut-il rappeler que l'endossement ne présentera pas toutes ces caractéristiques avant la fin du XVIIIe siècle. Certes, la question de la solidarité des signataires liée à l'endossement sera rapidement acquise, mais le principe de l'inopposabilité des exceptions, lui, sera beaucoup plus tardif à une échelle européenne. Alors pour conclure, évidemment, cette présentation ne fait que refléter un point de vue, celui de la pratique et du réseau Simonovic. C'est une recherche qui doit être enrichie, par exemple avec la résolution judiciaire des conflits, ou les analyses doctrinales, ou les influences de réseau. Mais je pense qu'elle suffit à démontrer l'absence de démarcation stricte dans l'évolution de la matière, dans l'évolution du droit cambiaire. Pour moi, la matière doit se comprendre tant par l'orientation donnée à l'instrument lui-même, par les praticiens, dans son utilisation concrète, que par ses attributs juridiques, notamment ceux qui seront théorisés par les juristes. Le droit cambiaire répond bien à l'idée d'un substrat commun, dans lequel des disparités vont émerger, sans remettre en cause une direction homogène, voire universelle. On cherche à peu près à faire la même chose, avec des techniques un peu différentes, mais sur un instrument commun. Il serait, en ce sens illusoire, de suggérer que chaque pratique peut se conformer aux attentes des autres, sans aucune différence, sans aucune disparité, sans aucune fluctuation, surtout à cette époque. Et je pense que la lex Mercatoria, dans une version assez tardive, trouverait ici une expression notable dans la question de l'adaptation des instruments juridiques. La lex Mercatoria serait-elle un bloc monolithique qui n'évolue pas, qui ne bouge pas, qui est figé à un instant T? Je ne pense pas, si on s'obstine à vouloir qu'une lex Mercatoria existe, je pense qu'elle a pu évoluer, mais l'évolution est-elle possiblement linéaire? Je ne le pense pas non plus. Et je pense que le droit cambiaire montre que l'évolution, créant de la disparité, peut côtoyer de l'homogénéité, voire de l'universalité. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci Victor, c'est hyper intéressant comme toujours. Allora, se qualcuno vuole fare una domanda, the floor is open, so feel free, eccola. Maria, and then Anya. Sorry?
It was for me.
Okay. So Maria, then Anya, and then we move to Victor. Il microfono.
He's here.
Era già pronto.
Incompetenza. So I'll ask in English simply because unfortunately I kind of think in English. I'll ask. So thanks to both, and thanks really Victor for this bit about the north-south divide and bridging it, the methodology, which I think is a very fruitful avenue of investigation, and I'm really looking forward to reading your work about it. But my question is to Luisa, really. Stupendously intrigued by this. Fantastic sources, and the more I hear and learn about studies on the Casa de Contratación, the more I'm completely in awe of the whole system. I have a few questions that would come to mind, and I would like to know more about it. And as you're beginning, I'm asking now. So it seems to me that this pattern that the wonderful Tomás de Mercado was trying to saying this is morally unquestionable, unacceptable, of rewarding more the investor than the person actually doing the job. The sort of business history line would argue in terms of we desperately need capital. There is a problem in raising capital. There is an embedded informational asymmetry, because if you're actually on the ground, you actually know what's going on. If you're investing from your estate around Cadiz, you have no idea. So we need to provide you an incentive in terms of potential higher profit that would make you overcome your natural tendency of not diving into the unknown and giving your pieces of eight to some incredibly long contract, who knows what goes on. So that would be a very standard way in which the sort of business historian would interpret this. What strikes me is that given the splendid evidence you have, will you be able to provide a database, a data set about the typology of investors? In a sense that, I mean, they're banal questions. Are they men? Are they women? I care less about that. What I care about is that few people giving, on average, medium to large amount of money, or do we have a sort of more capillary distribution? Because the way in which the profile of the investor can be seen as a second time as a way to see how the system was reacting to the desperate need for capital, which was general. You talk about pan-oceanic jurisdiction. I wouldn't call it, though, a lex Mercatoria. I mean, this is a composite monarchy that has just added a couple more pieces to the puzzle, fairly big one, and fairly wealthy. So as part of the general, I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by the Pragmatica de Alcalá. I'm going to ask you for references about that. But at that point, you need to add another bit of the word to a system which in itself is already flexible. I mean, there's one entity already by 1503, in terms of, not yet actually by 1503, or barely, the end of 1503, as one sovereign, but you do have an incredible jurisdictional variety even within the various parts of the composite. And the stuff that is happening in the 1580s becomes particularly interesting because of the union of the crown as well. So it's just Spain globalizing and becoming more efficient. Bit provocative, but absolutely fascinating. Can't wait to hear more.
Allora, mi permetto di rispondere in italiano perché tutti capiscono l'italiano più o meno e perché effettivamente sono domande molto, molto complesse, anche perché le fonti sono molto molto complesse, quindi ci vorrebbe veramente tanto tempo. La tua prima domanda sul rapporto lavoro-capitale è molto interessante perché per quello che io ho visto è un'importanza progressiva data al capitale che io leggo da tanti clues, da tanti indizi. Uno di questi indizi è la ripartizione dei guadagni e delle perdite. Progressivamente si trovano più contratti in cui, contrariamente all'abitudine del half and half, si dà più percentuale di guadagni, non di perdite, anzi spesso il capitalista viene esonerato dalle perdite, al punto che ci si chiede: non è questo un contratto di prestito? Forse. Ma per esempio ho trovato un contratto molto carino in cui il notaio si sente in dovere di giustificare il perché il socio capitalista partecipa a un terzo delle perdite e 2/3 dei guadagni, e il notaio scrive perché ha messo tanti soldi, lo dice proprio. Però questo per noi è importantissimo perché ci dice quanto nel rapporto contrattuale la manodopera e il capitale sono progressivamente squilibrati a favore del capitale. Il povero Tomás de Mercado fa delle descrizioni veramente carinissime di questi giovani mercanti, erano i ragazzi giovani che venivano mandati in Honduras, a Santo Domingo, e lui scrive: ma questi ragazzi così giovani vengono mandati per mesi e mesi in quelle paludi piene di zanzare a Santo Domingo, e poi tornano, già se tornano è già una vittoria, e poi vengono retribuiti con poco. Quindi lì è il prete che parla, che dice proteggiamoli questi ragazzi, ma chiaramente la tendenza era tutt'altra. Seconda domanda sulla tipologia degli investitori. Qui la faccenda diventa complicatissima perché per lungo tempo, già dal testamento di Isabella di Castiglia, teoricamente il commercio con l'America, con la parte spagnola dell'America, era riservata ai cittadini, diciamo ai sudditi della corona di Castiglia. Già la corona di Castiglia era si allargava e diminuiva nel corso degli anni. Però ovviamente non è che gli altri stavano fermi, quindi c'è tutto uno schermo di prestanomi, perché aprendo i contratti di società transatlantiche chiaramente sono tutti spagnoli, viceversa invece le società europee, ci sono francesi, olandesi, c'è di tutto. È molto difficile sapere chi c'è dietro a questi nomi spagnoli. Una mia ipotesi di lavoro, che sarebbe molto carina se avessi qualcuno che ci lavorasse, è andare a vedere nei documenti delle nazioni straniere a Siviglia, e forse si trova un po' di movimento di capitale che ci fa capire che sono stati investiti in società transatlantiche con i prestanomi. Però dai documenti notariali questo non si può vedere. Poi ho fatto una ricerchina sulla tipologia degli investitori, ci sono molte donne che mettono chiaramente capitale monetario. Ho trovato un tutore di un minore che lo usa la società per investire le liquidità del bambino, però anche lì è un po' difficile capire se appunto è una forma di prestito. Queste signore che non si presentano nemmeno davanti al notaio, mandano qualcun altro, insomma. Che quello è un po' difficile, però appunto molto interessante, e secondo me bisogna passare dagli archivi delle nazioni e possibilmente dal contenzioso delle nazioni genovese, la nazione, però bisogna avere appunto la voglia di andare a vedere.
La voglia c'è.
E per quanto riguarda la giurisdizione panamericana, giustamente hai delle riserve, una cosa un po' provocatoria, però secondo me non dobbiamo dimenticare, e qui parlo sotto il controllo di Ana, che la Spagna viene da un sistema giurisdizionale estremamente frammentato, los fueros, e questa giurisdizione panamericana, che si trova in tutti i contratti veramente, è l'universalizzazione côté juridictionnel, lato giurisdizionale, di questa tendenza all'universalità, di quella che anche a noi piace chiamare l'ex Mercatoria, e questo secondo me non va sottovalutato. Non so se avete visto, la formula è veramente assolutamente ampia, c'è una universalizzazione della competenza giurisdizionale che è molto forte. Però
Sorry, ma se posso, e continuo in italiano, la mia sensazione è che questo tentativo di restringimento delle autonomie locali dei fueros in ambito della penisola iberica sia un fenomeno comunque che sta accadendo allo stesso tempo. Allora, nel momento in cui aggiungo delle altre aree giurisdizionali che aumentano questo numero di fueros, però questi nuovi non hanno il tipo di claims del tipo ma però Don Pedro nel 927 mi aveva garantito questo tipo di privilegio, per cui in un certo senso l'esperienza coloniale può diventare di per sé un motivo, uno stimolo a una standardizzazione in un certo senso, perché se Dio vuole questi non hanno privilegi pregressi, scusate.
Sì, sono d'accordissimo, cioè l'esperienza coloniale ha come conseguenza un'uniformizzazione e un'amplificazione anche per motivi proprio territoriali, appunto c'è un tribunale ogni 1000 chilometri, quindi chiaramente non è che in Honduras ci fossero i fueros, quindi sicuramente, però appunto è comunque questa carrera di Indias che conduce a una standardizzazione, però ancora una volta parlo sotto il controllo di Ana.
Vorrei aggiungere solo una cosa. No, ma io ce l'ho. No, va benissimo, ma credo che sia importante, e questo credo che sarebbe molto interessante per le ricerche che stai facendo ora, dire che malgrado questo pluralismo legale che c'era, la frammentarietà in realtà non era un ostacolo, era un'occasione. Era un'occasione per i mercanti per fare business. Ma parlando di procedura, parlando dei notai, i notai sono assolutamente fondamentali. Perché? Perché questa giurisdizione panamericana funzionasse, in realtà ci volevano i notai. Perché? Perché i re cattolici, ma questo esisteva da prima, ma loro tramite queste leggi de Toledo del 1480 hanno incentivato l'uso di una procedura non sommaria, ma abbreviata, che è il juicio ejecutivo, che è la procedura breve della giurisdizione ordinaria. E hanno incentivato questo uso dai mercanti in modo che se si disponeva di un documento pubblico fatto davanti a un notaio, tu avevi a breve termine la restituzione del credito. E questo è stato assolutamente fondamentale per l'America e per la carrera dei Indias, perché grazie alla disposizione di questi cartas públicas, dei documenti notarili, qualsiasi giurisdizione, questa clausola della quale tu hai parlato, veniva garantita. Quindi non è che ci fosse una unica giurisdizione che funzionava, c'erano un sacco di tribunali, ma tutti rispettavano l'autorità del documento notarile, perché si considerava vero il contenuto. Basta, quindi fermo. Prima c'era la professoressa Ania, poi il professore. Non so se abbiamo ancora tempo.
No. È una volta riesco a essere breve. Quindi mi piace moltissimo questo dibattito, quindi non riesco a... Però in realtà...
3 minuti, così,
sì, va bene,
3 minuti facciamo...
Fino alle 4 massimo proprio, ok?
Vai. Ania, per favore.
Thank you very much. So thank you both of you for your worthwhile contributions. I have first a question and an observation I would like to share to you, Luisa. Maybe a question a little provocative. So what you described for the second half of the 16th century, was it really a modern phenomena? You said that previous contracts of partnerships were not able to capture the new dimension of the overseas transactions, especially regarding to the elements of risk and the dangerous trips they made. There is another sort of partnership which he knows better than me. It's the wedderlegging. It's a phenomenon of partnerships in the Hanseatic area in the Middle Ages. And for these protagonists, the trips were also very risky, very dangerous, and the specialty of this sort of partnership contracts was that, as you described as well, the duration of the partnership for the period of the trip. So I was wondering, it's the same phenomena with the same thinkings behind. And so the prerequisites were very similar. And therefore, you highlighted Thomas de Mercado and his paper. Was he aware of the Hanse when he highlights the specialty of this limitation of duration for the time of the trip, for example, and other elements? And so this was my question. And the observation I would like to share is the standardization of contracts. As far as I saw when I was looking for insurance contracts in the early modern period, we have a lot of parallels, both that what you described for the partnership contracts and that what I saw in the sources for the insurance contracts, both developed beside law. And both were following a very formal structure, and also very there are many parallels in terms of content, for example, the place of jurisdiction and so on. And so I think from the starting point that both developed beside law, meant, for example, for the insurance law, that law was established only on the basis of a long collection, a long time of collecting those contracts and the experience they got from these contracts. So, and the one question to you is the keyword of unification, which you said, and I agree in total, that there was no unified construction. There are, and especially, or for example, in the methods you described. But going back to one of your final points, and I would like to highlight this, I think it's very important to have in the focus the jurisdiction, because jurisdiction played, in my opinion, a very big role for this process of unification. There were a lot of differences in detail, but these differences in detail harmonized the jurisdiction. That's what I tried to work out in my book. So I would say, yes, you have to do that.
Thank you very much. Very, very quickly, about the modernity of these contracts, I found many traces, many elements, the complexity, but also the interest of this contract, that there are little elements that move, and at the end there is another model of partnership. And I think nothing is completely and radically new, but the combination of the little news have the result another kind. For instance, the duration. I showed the duration of the trip because it's very romantic, and it's very nice because the text is the partnership will end when the last boat of the fleet will arrive in Seville, and it's very romantic. But in my sample of contracts, I can notice the attempt of the merchant to last more and more the partnership, and the most important thing, and to continue the partnership with the heirs or the of the partner. It was not possible by a legal point of view, but it's clear the need to establish in the time the partnership. And another little thing about modernity, I think that in the history of the humanity, always something puts money and another partner take his boat or his horse and makes the trip. But until this moment, the two partners, the silent partner or the financial partner and the tractants, the manager, the active partner, knew very well each other. From this moment, the desperate need of capital makes that the element, the personal element, is progressive. It's not sudden, but lost of its importance. We merchant trusted in money and in contracts, because the stability of the text of the contract is a very important element of security for the merchant.
Yes, thank you very much. I also think that it is very important, especially by considering the different type of instruments, because I don't think you go through court for one bill of exchange as easy as for one contract, because the stakes are very different. So I'm very interested to see these questions, also especially because in the 16th century, the fairs were still prevalent for the Bill of Exchange, and they had their own codes. So yes, thank you.
We have another question over there, and also Professor Speciale voleva dire qualcosa. Un minuto, va bene, meglio così.
Grand merci y muchísimas gracias. It was really nice to hear these complementary perspectives from different backgrounds in Roman-speaking areas. My question, of course, comes from the perspective of a scholar of Romance languages and language history. But as you spoke about unification, you mentioned that the form of the Tomás de Mercado of this treatise is rather homogeneous in the language. You mentioned the language. I was wondering if that is the case for the kinds of documents you, in French you analyzed, because we had a project, a DFG project in Tübingen quite a long time ago on legal texts in medieval Castilian and the discourse traditions in the fueros that you can see there. And I was really, it struck me how homogeneously homogeneous the language, the Spanish was. It's a siglo de oro Spanish, but it's a very clear and typical discourse tradition of the kinds of texts you would have at the time. It doesn't seem so spontaneous and just these texts you find in early Middle Ages in Italy, for example, where these are just spontaneous uses of the language, whereas you would have to look for Latin texts to have a nicely constructed and drafted text. So discourse tradition, would you say there is a kind of a discourse tradition that is already established in the documents you analyzed?
It's a very interesting question. I think, again, Anna would be better than me to answer. But reading this contract, I have to say that there is not only a standardization in the structure, but also in the language, in legal language. So it's not so difficult to read these documents once they are transcribed, because the problem is that the transcription is not the translation. Once transcribed, these contents are easy to read, because I think that notary had forms that they followed, forms coming very often from Italy, and very often some phrases is still in Latin. There is formulas in Latin, but even the formulas in Latin are very standardized, are always the same. So it's clear that notaries are working with formularies with them. About scholars, the language of the scholars, and I'm looking for Windecock if he's there. Tomás de Mercado is quite an exception, because other scholars from Salamanca used to write in Latin, and they really like to write a good Latin and humanistic Latin. And the two examples are Tomás de Mercado, but because his work, it's a manual for the merchants, and Martín de Azpilcueta, who writes in Castellano, because again his public are the professional, not the scholars, but for the rest of the academic production is in Latin. Sometimes the Latin is awful, sometimes the Latin is very elegant, but is in Latin.
Do you want to answer? No?
Yes, maybe. I think it's it's a selling point for the verb exchange to have symbolically an homogeneous form since the end of the medieval period. If we compare this verb exchange from the 14th century, from the 16th century, and from the 18th century, we can see a lot of similarities. It can mean a lot of things, but I think it's one of the main points of the bills to be recognized very easily and to be transported very easily, also like the modern Czech, for example.
Can I add just a little thing about the standardization of the language in the contracts? The Pragmatica de Alcalá imposed to notaries to the notaries were paid 4 pages. So the practice was to use margins very, very large. The Pragmatica de Alcalá imposed very slim margins, and so the language became very redundant. They use a lot of synonyms to full the pages and to be paid more. So the style of the contract changes and became completely redundant.
Very interesting.
Yes, but for money questions.
Grazie a entrambi perché vista l'ora era difficile intervenire, però siete riusciti a tenerci sveglissimi, quindi grazie. Volevo dire solo 2 cose. Probabilmente nei contratti tuoi pesa molto la tradizione della commenda. Non è un prestito, ma è una partecipazione al rischio d'impresa, e questo spiega il tasso alto, la divisione, cioè tra 3/4 e 1/4, anche perché il capitalista corre il rischio d'impresa, se l'affare non va bene perde tutto. Quindi potrebbe essere questa una spiegazione. Per quanto riguarda invece la lettera di cambio e la girata, non è un caso che poi alla fine la girata sarà vietata in quasi tutti i sistemi, perché quando interagisce con il fallimento, girata più fallimento significa un problema enorme e insormontabile da risolvere. Per quanto riguarda la tipologia degli investitori, io credo che la maggior parte, più che capitalisti, almeno per quello che ho visto io, però non ho fatto una ricerca sistematica, la maggior parte degli investitori sono mercanti, non necessariamente capitalisti di rendita. Solo questo. Grazie ancora per il contributo.
Allora, possiamo concludere. Ringrazio tanto i nostri relatori, ringrazio anche la nostra PI per concederci mezz'ora in più. Credo che ci sia un coffee break, no? C'è un coffee break.
Sì, adesso va.
Caffè.